Hi, this is Dawn Richerson here for Letters to the Church, and I'm here to share a series of videos. Today's video will be one in a series, let's put it that way, about things or teachings from Jesus or things about Jesus that the church gets wrong. And, like I jokingly want to call this that the church gets dead wrong, because anyone who knows me knows that what I'm passionate about and what I believe Jesus came for was what he said, what is recorded in John 10:10. I have come that they might have life and have it to the full. And it is about Jesus's life, not his death. It is about our life, our fullness, our radiant expansion to the fullest possible degree, not about falling in line, not about contraction, and certainly not about death and suffering and reduction. And the church has made it that. So today, so all of these, the series will, things about Jesus the church gets wrong will be, they are shocks to the system, designed to set the church free to be what it claims to be, which is the true witness to the love of God in Christ Jesus in the world today. And the world, in case anyone hasn't looked around, needs that true witness. We all need that. We need hope and love and faith. And so that's what the series will be about. And today's video is, I'm going to do the hardest one first. So first of all, let me just say, I have tried to avoid this. I have put off talking about this for a long time. I often have said that was for very personal reasons, because I didn't feel like I could withstand any more directed at me in terms of anger, rage, or malicious comments or any of that, and the comments will be turned off on this video and likely this series of videos. You may send me an email, however, and I welcome that. It's dawnricherson@gmail.com. So today's video, I'm gonna go ahead and tackle the most difficult one first, but let me just tell you the backstory. So I've avoided talking about this topic for a very long time. For a lot of reasons. I think it's going to be easily misconstrued, both my intention in sharing this and the validity of what I share, because it is from personal soul recollections and memories that I carry, whether I was given access to those or whether I lived them, or whether, even if you think that I'm just sort of like spouting off the story, then, that is absolutely follow what you are receiving in your heart, and trust that, and that that will ultimately lead you to truth and to further revelation. So but I will be sharing directly from my own knowing in this video. And so today's truth about things about Jesus that the church gets wrong is going to be on the topic of Jesus and sacred sexuality. And a little bit more of the backstory here is that when I knew that I wanted to do this series and share it, for a long time I put it off for, like I said, a variety of reasons. Partly also because, I have always envisioned that I would have a certain support in my life in terms of, either that structure that was knocked out from under me in terms of, various systems, church included, or, quite frankly, somebody's got my back, a friend. And, while I'm very grateful for those out there who are my friends, don't want in any way for you to feel like your support is not valuable to me. It is, absolutely, and thank you. At the same time, this is very highly controversial, what I'll be saying, and it is also highly personal to me. Both because my stream of recollection in this area is very dear to my heart, and also because my life here and now is interwoven with these soul memories and with the things that I'll be sharing. And at the same time, I'm on the way with my life here. I am on the way to my life and life to the full. And I feel really good about walking in that way. And at the same time, my life is not perfect, has not been perfect. And when it comes to the subject that I will be talking about today, there have been, quote, mistakes along the way. Although, really, Jesus is always telling me, that, no mistake can be your grave, and that the way we see our lives unfolding, that's really critical. So leave that for another video. So this particular what I'll be sharing today, probably fairly briefly and on a high level, is something that, I've put off for a long time. It's definitely not the first video I would want to make, but I was really clearly directed that it would be the first. And so this was several weeks, maybe months ago. And I've delayed it. And then finally, one day when it was like, I felt like the relentless Jesus, was like right here, like on my shoulder saying, speak, 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 speak. I fooled around with, but I don't know where to put it. And, I don't know how to say it. And I got to figure it out. And then after I got over that hurdle and, I could no longer sustain that argument, if you will, it was clear that I just needed to do it. So I turned on the video camera and I did this. And then my ego came in again and I erased the video. And so I was going to sleep tonight at 3 times today, was told, if you will, to sit down and do this. And I said, no, or later, whatever, excuse after excuse. Did a different video, which, I really believe was also one I was meant to share. But the point is that I've been avoiding this for a variety of reasons. And so I'm starting to go to sleep and it's late. Thus how I look. I was already ready for bed, basically. And Jesus is like, no, you're going to do this now. And so I've turned on the camera. I have a very, very few notes. I have a small amount here. I may go ahead and read a few things that I've written, and then as a way to open up this video, and then I'll share a little bit from my heart. So it will likely take me, a series of videos to kind of get this out. And then at some point, my hope is that I will be able to make some sense of it and share it with you in a format that is, more organized, let's say. Organization is not my strong suit. And so bear with me. And I also am aware that, I'm aware that my job is just to create this and that it will be connected, as most of my work. This is the case. It will be connected in some other fashion as it is needed. And often what I find is, a lot of what I'm asked to do here and now is like just to put little seeds out there. And so you can consider this series, if you will, of things the church gets wrong about Jesus as, sort of that one of those seed offerings. And I will circle back to threads of this in various places when I feel led to do so. So without further ado, and I'm going to try to retain my composure and stay really connected. But this is highly personal to me, and it's a really vulnerable topic, particularly speaking directly to those of you connected to the church in any form. But the bottom line is that Jesus has been hugely misrepresented where it comes to sexuality by the church. This has been deliberate in many cases, and it goes back to the very inception of the church as a structure, as a system of belief that was put out, again, in the name of Jesus. It's all been done in the name of Jesus, in the name of love. And sexuality in particular is something that you don't hear a lot about with Jesus, right? It's just like this sort of missing piece. And there have been lots of documentaries, books, and other sorts of materials made available in recent years that do raise this question, thankfully, because, hey, we're living in 2017, and it's very unlikely, and here I'm speaking just from my human perception, my mind and my heart. It's very unlikely that Jesus went through 33 years of his life without ever having a sexual thought or coming up against sexual feelings or desires or urges that are natural human tendencies. It's also implausible, really, to most of us that he wouldn't have had to make a clear choices and decisions, and yet Jesus has often been presented as asexual by the church, and or that area of his life is either not talked about at all or explained neatly in such a way that anybody who even the most saintly among us, anyone who has walked through this life understands that it's primary to the human composition, that sexuality is a part of who we are, and not just, and by the way, often I find anyway in Christian tradition, which is what I'm addressing here, is Christ-centered faith and religion, and the teachings of Jesus. What I find often is that it's sort of a roped off area, right? And it's very interesting how even in more liberal traditions and or open, it's fascinating. Actually, this happens in culture as well, but sexuality is rarely even touched, and when it is, there's such a sense of tie-in with that shame and original sin. So I'm all over the map. Let me do this. Let me just read a few things that I've written, and then I'll have a few other things to say. So, contrary to the belief perpetuated by the church over the last 2,000 years, Jesus did not avoid the topic of sexuality. Jesus taught that it was essential to bring together seeming opposites. So some examples of that would be male and female, light and dark, spirit and matter. This philosophy, which he infused into his teachings, has been called Tantra, which is a much broader philosophy that than the way most of us in Western, particularly in Western church tradition, would think of that as a very Eastern concept, and we would also think of it in terms of its expression through sexuality. So we would think of tantric union or tantric sex, and so it's much more than that. Again, the idea, and I'll address this in a separate video, is the bringing together of seeming opposites and the harmonization and the wholeness. It's all about walking in the way of wholeness. Okay, so to begin, though, like that frame is important to understand that Jesus, essential to everything he taught, was the bringing together of seeming opposites. And so while this general philosophy that he drew from, Tantra, isn't just about sex, it's also true that the purification and the elevation of sexuality, human sexuality, through tantric principles, which was for all people, whether you're in partnership or you're living alone, was an important part of what he taught and practiced. This teaching applied to all, again, not just those living in partnership, and certainly not just those living in heterosexual partnerships who had been through a particular type of courting, and so my point is it was broad, not narrow. In our day and time, sexuality has been defined very often by those affiliated with the church as the opposite of the sacred. And this deliberate rejection or the deliberate rejection of all things sexual as profane has created this sort of false polarization between sexuality and spirituality. We have seen those as diametrically opposed. Sexuality, human sexuality, and what that is all about, and the expression of it in particular, and spirituality in particular, orthodoxy, complete, they are not, the two shall never meet. And so that, even that conceptually is opposed to how Jesus taught about who we are and an approach to life and the embrace of all and the cleansing of all and the raising or elevation of ourselves through the expression of all. And so it's simply not how Jesus approached sexuality whatsoever. Jesus taught about creative life force and about becoming the master of that as it moves through us, and what we bring forth through us, and how we engage with the world and how we love one another. That's what Jesus was interested in. And so to even presume that he would have cut off one area of ourselves is just not aligned with his entire approach to life. And even we see that if you simply read the words of Jesus that are recorded in the gospel narratives, that's clear. So I'd invite you to do that. So central to his teaching was the fact that we have come to have life and to have it to the full. John 10:10. He never excluded physical pleasure and sexuality from that. That is a part of life. Now, how we are all choose to express that, and the degree to which perhaps we experience ourselves as sexual beings varies widely. And yet the point is that Jesus never taught a path of exclusion of any of who we are. So in fact, the harnessing of the sexual life force energy was actually central to his teaching and healing. And now I am speaking from this point forward, drawing on what I have always remembered. I cannot explain that to you, and I'm not going to try to do that. I am, however, sharing what I know to be true, so take it or leave it. And as far as the evidence and historical accuracy, I leave that to those who are called to those things, as I've said in previous videos. So Jesus taught that harnessing of sexual life force energy through by suggesting to his closest followers that the proper expression of that, our sexuality, that life force energy, whether individually or in union with another, it was about bringing ourselves into harmony with the universe, and becoming co-creators of what I like to call a timeless tapestry of truth. And those are my words. And yet what I recall, both from my own, kind of soul memories, but also from the teachings and all he shared, is that we were active participants and, in fact, creators in this life. And we were, literally co-creators with God, and that the greater our mastery over all of the ways life gets expressed through us, the more effective we would be at creating a world of harmony and balance and beauty, where we would indeed experience life, the life more abundant. So becoming whole in our sexuality is a key to the radiant realization of who we are and who we have created to be and why we are here on this earth. So that wholeness in terms of sexuality is actually really, really an integral part of this whole picture of becoming, fully realizing who we are as humans created here on earth in this time in these bodies. And so wholeness and it wasn't just wholeness and then, somehow sexuality was excluded from that. No, it is central, and that was very clear in his teachings. So the path to that wholeness, and again, my understandings of his teaching begins with a whole new way of seeing ourselves as perfectly created in love, through love, for love. Now, again, that does not mean a certain type of love, and it certainly is not limited to sexuality. We've got a problem with how we view sexuality, and particularly here I am speaking to the church. Historically, all kinds of nonsense has been taught, all kinds of harm has been perpetuated, and this is an area that I feel very passionately about that has been completely, the teachings of the church have been completely opposed to all of the beauty of and fullness of Jesus's message in terms of this area. The first step is to make that journey. I call it the journey back to sacred wholeness. That journey back to wholeness through the full reclamation of our sexual nature. To see this as gift, and not only gift, a gift of which we are deserving to receive fully. Whatever that means for us. Now, it's a delicate area, which is likely why the church so neatly swept it to the side, because it's difficult, even and actually especially in our time, but equally so in first century in Rome, where Christianity, the church was or the church anyway, really sprang up. And then even within those communities, those early church communities in and near the Holy Land, that sprang up, and then in Greek and other cultures. So I'm sorry, I'm reining myself back here because I kind of want to go on a tangent, but I'm going to try to stay with this, this teaching of sexuality that Jesus gave. So as we free ourselves from lower frequency perspectives on sexuality, which has often been tied by the church to this perceived shamefulness of being human itself, and so when we free ourselves of that lower way of seeing our sexuality in terms of linking it to shame, and when we free ourselves most especially from the false concept of original sin, then we'll allow in more and more of the love of God, which is our true divine nature, and that includes the expression of that love and appreciation and gratitude for who we are and the wonder of our creation as sexual beings. And that's the first step, is to reclaim the beauty and divinity of our sexuality, which is inherent to our being human, right? And it is beautiful, and we have made it anything but that. And so the journey back to sacred wholeness individually has to do with each of us coming to an understanding of how beautiful and diverse and amazing we are. I'm not suggesting by this that any behavior goes, because the whole point is to reclaim fully and align that with the love of God and with the freedom for which we are created. And then there's also this collective journey that we must make. This collective journey back to sacred wholeness is absolutely the reclamation of, I would say, the true teachings of Jesus. But I'm not suggesting that you take my word for it. But I do think it's important for the church to really look at what are we really perpetuating here? What kind of story are we telling about who Jesus was? What kind of story are we telling about what Jesus taught? What kind of are we freeing individuals with our teachings and messages about sexuality, or are we keeping people in prisons and actually creating systemic a system of shame. I personally believe that that is precisely what the church has done over century after century after century after century. Going back to the stories that or let me just say, I'm not going to say the stories, but going back to the foundations of the early church and things that were going on at that time, both in terms of the people who were involved in the earliest movements, because they were humans just like us, and they struggled with this too, surprise. And so this was a natural area. It's delicate, right? We all come up against issues related to either in internal and or in our environment, related to sexuality and the expression of our sexuality. And we must ask ourselves, is this okay? Is this not okay with me, with how I'm feeling, with who? Is this true? Is this an authentic expression, a co-creation that is right and true and good for me? And then there's also, of course, what we see in the world, and we live in a culture, of course, saturated by sexuality and by sex, and by the perversion and promotion of that, and it's often reduced to the lowest common denominator or used as a tool. Either way, it is devalued, and the devaluation of sexuality is something the church has participated in by the very nature of not touching it with a 10-foot pole, and also by perpetuating this sort of idea that that Jesus or the saintly ones are somehow removed from sexuality. I mean, in certain traditions, that is absolutely a part of the lineage that's handed down, and somehow the people who are choose a celibate lifestyle, which is an amazing thing, and yet there has been this idea of this separation has been created by the, in some case, clearly false teachings, but also by the omission of sexuality, like the kind of let's clean the story up, and it's really created a situation where the church is awash in this sort of shame-based thinking about the very nature of humanity, such as the concept of the fall and original sin, which I don't know who will be listening to this video, but it's really important that we examine the beliefs that have been handed down to us and ask ourselves, do I really believe this about God? Is this true? That we really test those things for ourselves. Okay, back to sexuality. So the first, kind of step is this reclamation, the full reclamation of who we are as sexual beings, individually, and then at the church collectively, to take a look at how perhaps we have omitted this in such a way that really, where does this lead to? So kind of looking, connecting the dots. The second, kind of piece of this puzzle here is to make the journey, the second journey that's always unfolding. There's the journey to sacred wholeness, which is the inner reclamation of who we are. And then the second is the journey to soulful transformation happening simultaneously. And that journey is all about, the setting free, the radiant realization, the absolute stepping into the fullness of who we are, and that, life more abundant. And in terms of sexuality, that has to do with our intimate connection to the whole creation through the union of spirituality and sexuality, so that they are not seen as opposites. They actually are brought into harmony, and that is something, again, that I feel like in Jesus's teachings, was both happening individually and then in the collective, and it's something that I feel is really an opportunity for the church right now. So we can do this, let me talk about the individual first. We can do this by seeing the spiritual and the physical as one unified flow of life, rather than creating this false division. And individually, as we kind of harness those sexual energies, our life force, we allow those to transform us and to lift us to a higher awareness and a deeper connection and a broader transformation of life itself, of the whole creation. So all is elevated as we are, embrace fullness and only that which is most true, authentic, pure stream within ourselves. We're naturally doing this for the collective, and there's a transformation that can occur. I will say that through sacred sexuality, in all forms, we ourselves are changed. We are brought closer to ourselves, to our whole self and our soul self. We are brought closer to the other, if that is a shared expression of sexuality in a sacred union, for example, and closer to life and all of creation, and closer to the Creator, to God who created us as we are, as sexual beings, and that's a portion of who we are. But it is an absolute gift, and the church has made it into something to hide in a dark corner. So the sacred sexuality, there's a lot more I could share there, but the point I'm trying to make is that we must accept the mantle of responsibility for becoming a co-creator, and we have to release that which would corrupt the purity, or it would lead us to deny the full pleasure or the full embodiment and restoration of our role as a co-creator, a contributor to life and the life more abundant. And so that can look differently. There's a room for diversity here. That can look like choosing a celibate lifestyle. That can look like a traditional marriage, heterosexual marriage between a male and a female. That can look like a different type of union. In my opinion, that can certainly look like a partnership that does not involve legal marriage. No, that will be controversial. That can involve the expression of our sexuality as a single person. And by the way, another thing that I see personally that the church does is reduce that to some act. It's nonsense. It's like brainwashing thousands, millions, more than thousands, billions of people through time, and it's the reduction. That's the opposite of what Jesus taught. That's the opposite of living in full expression, of flourishing in our humanity, and of bringing more and more of our divinity here and now. And that's another thing the church has done. It is somehow separated God, who created sexuality, by the way, and it is taken God and often tied sin to sexuality and created that as the opposite of God. It's a lie. It is not true, and it is a lie that has been perpetuated by the church, in part conveniently by control and manipulation, and the reduction of sexuality to typically physical, carnal acts, again, separated from spirituality. So the spirituality has been sucked out of our sexuality, and meanwhile, sex has become a taboo subject in Christian religious circles. And that only has perpetuated these scandals that we have seen, and the cover-ups and the desperate behaviors and the vast sums of money that, by the way, have usually come from the contributions of people who are participating members of those systems. And it's quite sickening to see. I do have specific recollections about Jesus' teachings around sexuality that have to do with my own experience in that time. And I guess what I'll say about that is that essentially it's again about all of our life energy, to include sexuality, but again, life energy isn't just sexuality. It's not, and it's certainly not just our expression of ourselves as sexual beings. It's much more than that. It's much more beautiful than that. And so Jesus' teachings, though, had to do with the proper alignment and flow of that life force energy in ways that were honoring of ourselves, of our bodies, of our minds, of our spirits, of our souls, tending to our soul's care and authentic soul expression, that we're also, pure and holy, holy with an H and holy with a W, aligned with coming before God naked and unashamed, and not using naked here as in no clothes, but unashamed of who we are, because we have been created in the image of God. And yes, it was about mastering our thoughts and our feelings and our choices and our actions and our words and our deeds. And it also was about everything is energy. And that's another thing Jesus taught that the church conveniently puts in little categories. It was all about aligning all of who we are and opening those channels so that could flow unobstructed, that there were not those energetic blocks that typically had to do with holding on to shame and or victimization or seeing ourselves as a victim and or a victimizer of those experiences that we internalized that were maybe about abandonment or betrayal or rejection or body image or other sorts of associations that we made about who we are as sexual beings based on childhood experiences and or encounters with other people. In the days of the early church, there was a lot of that in terms of the culture of the time. Certainly, I'm laughing because it's certainly here now too, in a different sort of way. And so there's also the Jesus taught a lot about he in many ways came to flip the system. It's why I believe many of us are here in this time is to do the same thing. And in a sense that when I say flip the system, I don't mean disregard it and just only dismantle it, but I do mean set it free. I do mean really take a look from the inside, from those who are within that system, who love, maybe who have been blessed by something in the tradition, and to reclaim that pure stream and to bring it forward. And this is not something, obviously we're not all going to agree on. That's why there are so many different traditions and so many different splinter groups. But I think where we need to start is with with the core teachings of Jesus and how Jesus described humanity and the model that Jesus gave to us. And I'm not suggesting that we are, we do not all come into this reality embodying the light of Christ that fully, that the actualized light of Christ that Jesus bore. And we are certainly not all are in the path for our life is not for us all to, be crucified on a literal cross and raised up. And yet, isn't the true teaching of Jesus, and doesn't the church agree on this, that the true teaching is to shed all that does not belong, to us, and to love ourselves, to love others as we love ourselves, to love God, and to walk through this life in a way that is honoring of God and of the other, and with love and compassion, and with grace and with mercy. And I think that often the church has, it's interesting because it's almost like has, set up traps for people to fall into, particularly around this topic of sexuality, and then perpetuated, a system of shame. And it's just the harm that is done. And I have experienced this firsthand. It's so fascinating if I look at it just from a cerebral point of view. And yet I cannot, what's happened to me is nothing like what's happened to people through the centuries, from people who, so from the whole gamut, right? From individuals who, perhaps, weren't perfect at their choices or actions with regard to sexuality, and then are condemned, with people who are falsely accused, with people who are caught up from their own conditioning and their own trauma, and they're caught up in something where they themselves are compromised, and or they really are longing and desiring to be made whole in this area. And what does the church do? Dumps heaps more shame on them, or casts them out, or otherwise judges or condemns, or likes to label and split hairs and or try to somehow fix them or change their experience of themselves. It's just ludicrous if you really look at that and then put that next to how Jesus treated people, just even by what is recorded in the accepted books of the Bible. And I'm here to tell you that what I remember of walking with Jesus was, in terms of every area that he taught, and to include sexuality, was always about an elevation and a liberation and a freedom and a purification and an offering to God that came through our embracing the whole of who we are. It was never, ever about restriction, about denial, about legalism. It was never about looking outside of ourselves for approval, a rubber stamp. It was not about going through, the motions in terms, it certainly was not about, the laws of man. It was never about that with Jesus. And none of us can judge another. And yet, that is precisely what the church does, both with individuals, with other groups, with it's endless debating about what is right and what is not right. And it's, again, I understand that some of that needs to happen. We need to grapple with those questions, and yet again, it's all been I'm sure I'm not articulating this. Maybe when I write about it, this will come out a little bit better. But we have cheapened. We have cheapened ourselves and others in terms of sexuality, and Jesus did quite the opposite. He did quite the opposite. So I would just invite us all to return to the stories that are recorded in the Gospels that we do have. And I will probably say some more in future writings or things I share. But for now, I think I want to leave it at that. And just wanted to share those thoughts that I have in terms of something about Jesus and who he was, and what he taught and how he lived, that the church, gets wrong, and that the church actually contributes more death to the world rather than the life that Jesus stood for, to include this area of sexuality and seeing it as one. And that thus the term sacred sexuality, because it is sacred, it is holy. We are whole. We are made in the image of God. And that includes passion and love and sexuality, and we become bearers of the Christ light. We don't become better bearers of the Christ light by denying our sexuality. If we feel called honestly and authentically to that path, that's one thing. But again, it should not be a denial of who we are. It should rather be simply a choice, a way, an action, a practice that we choose. Because denial of who we are will only lead to inner corruption, which will come forth and will not be it will not be a contribution or creative contribution to life. It will rather be again more and more and more. And that's what's happened through the centuries. And it's like sort of a setup because of how this all went. And so my vision in this one here is that, well, first of all of the things that the church has been hiding, meaning the church in Rome and the Vatican archives and in other things that have been denied and stamped out in history, because there are some people, I believe, who know bits of the truth. And so my first hope is that those truths come to light, that they come to light, and that for us individually, that we be discerning, of course, and we always look to the person of Jesus, not to some institution. And that as a group of fellow believers who seek to bear the light of Christ and to be authentic witnesses to the transformative power and the transformative path of Jesus, that we each seek to really bring our own sexuality back into wholeness, and that we reconcile within ourselves what needs to be reconciled, and that we remain present to it, and that we bring our love to ourselves and our make our requests known before God, again, both individually and collectively. I would be so thrilled to see a day where people who are grappling with this individually and for collective groups, they're not shamed or excluded or rejected or otherwise made to feel as if they were deficient, because in some ways they are the bravest, the most courageous, the most shining examples of exactly the way Jesus walked through this life, which was with integrity to absolutely examine all that was in his heart and soul, and to bring it forward, and to bring it to life, and to bring to life his life. And that included, his own sexuality, I believe, in terms of, certainly harnessing it and allowing it to come forth from him, that passion for life, because that is what our sexuality is all tied up with. That, it's not just we've cheapened it. We've really cheapened it. We've made it about some sort of sinful thought, and then we've corrupted the whole thing. And it's a sacred gift, and we need to honor that gift. It is precious, and that is how Jesus saw that. I'm going to leave it at that for now. I feel like I've done step 1 here. I'll probably just make this video available just like it is. I'm not perfect again. And, I hope that this has been helpful to someone out there. Lots of love. And, if you are a person who's been affected in any way by the church's teachings, in the name of Jesus, in terms of sexuality, then, I really hope that you will bring that love to yourself and ask Jesus to help you and to stand with you and to assist you and to lead you to those things that will bring you back into harmony with life and into harmony with yourself and into harmony with your Creator, who gave you this aspect of being human, and this way of expressing yourself through your humanity, through your body, that is an expression, a creative expression of love, of life. And so ask for assistance, and forgive where you are able. In terms of the church, I really feel that there's a lot that needs to be made right. And it's been 2,000 years. So I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen overnight. But I do believe that the full individual and within individual congregations, and then within the church as a whole, that the honest coming fully to this, and really being present to it, and asking God to work through us individually and in these collective groups to work a great act of redemption and restoration. I believe it is possible. And so lots of love to you, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.